This is Computing Up, conversations about computation writ large with Michael Littman and Dave Ackley. This episode was recorded September 24th, 2021.
Hey everybody, welcome back. So, we have with us today Anita Nikolich, who, along with me, was a AAAS fellow.
It's a lot of A's.
It's a lot of A's, yeah. And well, the other thing I really like about it is that we were the 2020-21 fellows, and that's 3 20s in a row, which you rarely get.
2020 and 2021.
2020-21. So if you say it out loud, it's 3 20s and then a 21. No, sorry, 3 20s and then a 1. 2020-21.
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Well, that really is what makes it.
Yeah, so that's why we were chosen to be fellows, and so I got to know her in that context, and I just thought she thinks about AI and she thinks about computer security, and she's doing some really cool stuff. And I wanted Anita to meet Dave, and so I thought that would be this would be a good way to have a chat. So Anita, Thank you for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, our pleasure. So why don't we kick things off? Can you say a little bit about, I don't know, how you got to where you are now?
So I'm at University of Illinois now. I'm a research scientist. My background is kind of a varied one. I've loosely been involved in security for my whole career. I started out as a cryptographer with a big 3-letter agency, and kind of moved on from there. Back in the 90s when ISPs were, kind of just starting at the major level, I did security there, went to enterprise, then ended up in academia. So I've kind of been loosely affiliated with security. I'm also one of the co-leads of the DEFCON AI Village. So DEFCON's the big hacker conference. It now gets like 25,000 people. The AI Village started 3 years ago. So we've been doing it for about 3 years. And I'm not the smartest AI person in the village, but I'm definitely one of the oldest. So I think I have a kind of a broad view of security and kind of can harness the energy of the younger folks.
So there's always a trade-off with the age, right? The age gives you experience, but it also gives you outdatedness. So hopefully you find a way to balance that.
We were talking about file systems and how the younger generation have no concept of file systems. So we had a robust debate.
I just saw that go by on Twitter about people don't know what a folder is. I mean, it's not even that they haven't got the metaphor. It's just, screw it. The system should just find whatever files I'm thinking about.
It's like named data networking, how that was fashionable 10 years ago. Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, but one thing I'm not quite getting is, so you were, computer security obviously is a really central topic in computer science, and AI is a central topic in computer science, but like not the same. And so what is it that in your background in security that kind of got you towards this this group of people who are thinking about AI and security together?
So there's always emerging areas within AI. Or within security. So my background really is more networking security, kind of hardcore network security. I've been involved with DEFCON on and off for a while. I got involved
Could you say just a few words more about DEFCON for those of us who don't know exactly what that is? So DEFCON, I remember that phrase from the movie War Games, right, where they went through DEFCON 1 through 5.
It's a take on that. It's this computer security conference that started, back in the 90s. I went to a
conference. I get it. So DEFCON in the movie was Defense Condition. This is Defense Conference.
And it used to be one of the only places where weirdos could gather in Vegas. I think the first one I went to was 1998. It was probably
that's
the 6th
why
or 7th.
Vegas was invented, but okay, that's fine.
Well, it was weirdos plus 3-letter agencies could gather.
And they had a spot the Fed thing where you just find out who's the Fed.
Right.
And
Oh, I see. So it's a gathering of sort of maybe counterculture-y, security-minded people.
It used to be
privacy.
Yeah,
more.
It used to be much more hardcore, like really stuff you could not tell your day job you were doing. That has changed, by the way, immensely, where many people are staying in these suites paid for by their day job, and the feds are welcome, and EFF is there. I have a love-hate with that whole setup. Yeah. I stayed away from.
I don't think you get to 25,000 attendees without having some of that change happen.
It's called money, but but it's all good. But it is a place where people can talk a little more freely. They have something called Sky Talks, which is always closed. You can't record. People line up for hours. The Crypto Village, which I often will participate in. People will stand in Vegas on 6 a.m. on a Sunday to be able to buy a crypto puzzle, to just go and sit for 8 hours with your best friends and work out puzzles. Nowhere else does this happen. So it is a unique kind of place.
Wow.
So the AI Village was new.
Okay. And so how did that come about? Were you one of the founders of that? And if so, what led up to it?
I'm not one of the founders. I started during the second year. And what led to my involvement in this was the folks who ran the voting village, the election hacking village, said, the AI village, they're doing some cool stuff, but they're young and they kind of need some help knowing the ropes of, again, a love-hate thing with DEFCON is you're doing cool stuff. You want the press, you want people to know. If you're like me, you're more of like an activist bent. But how do you get that word out? If you're younger, you do AI. These people don't necessarily do security. They do AI. By converging people like me who take a broader look at security, AI experts, but then have the seasoned, background to say, if you really want to make change, you've got to get, whether you like it or not, you've got to get to people who make standards and policy and the press. And you have a love-hate with all of them, but that's how you affect change. And this is kind of the flavor that I brought to the village for the past couple of years.
Interesting. And so go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry.
No, I was just wondering, do you think it works at all? Do you think that DEFCON is part of a flow that does lead to policy or push policy in any detectable way?
I think in certain areas, I think for sure with the voting village, they were very hell-bent,
Right.
2017 on really making change. And this led to, it led to hearings with Congress people. It led to people really questioning voting machine efficacy. The way they did that, though, was some party tricks, which, they had 11-year-olds hacking voting machines.
Hack the machine, right.
And some of the stuff the 11-year-olds did, because we do participate in something called Roots Village, which is all kids, like 7 through 14. And I do a lot of stuff with like white hat kitty hackers. But part of the secret sauce was getting people to say, wow, an 11-year-old can hack a voting machine. I think at that area it's been effective. I think in the car area it's been effective. Granted, it's a closed course, but showing in 2014 that you can send a Chrysler off the road, that did affect policy where they took these safety standards. The FDA is laser focused on using the hacker village, the biohacking village, to affect policy on that. Now they're leaning towards us to say, okay, we have these best practices for machine learning for medical devices. What does that mean? Is it secure? So they're getting there. So I think in small areas there has been change.
Well, certainly in the case of the voting machines, there was kind of a groundswell coming from a lot of directions. But for sure, the car hacking stuff, since there hasn't really been the smoking gun yet, having those kinds of demos could make a real difference.
That's
I
right.
See that. But now, okay, so now just if I understand the car thing correctly, as you said, it's somebody was able to hack into a car, which is now they're way more of a computer than they used to be. And so it has a system in it. You can actually access it and then interfere with the operation of the car, in this case, driving it off the road. So it's car stuff, but it's car plus security. And so I'm not quite getting the AI stuff, AI plus security.
So the car stuff is really more safety. So the AI security. Okay. So there's this emerging area between. So there's a couple areas. If you're like me, I have much more of a practitioner background than academic. So if you're like me, part of what enterprises are looking for is, how do I know that the AI thing or decision making thing that I buy, one, it's secure? How do I know that it's secure from hackers? How do I know that it's trustworthy? So how do I know it's resilient? So there's these questions that are emerging. Who's looking at this? The security people are not trained. And, kind of, I guess the third area is, how do I know I can catch if my security has been tampered with in my AI system? That's an area, whether it's called machine learning security or AI sec, which is in between the two. Nobody in AI is really trained to look for this thus far. Security, we're definitely not trained for this. So how do you bring these groups together, and what do you need to do to create people who can do those things? Very few people can do that.
So are we talking, AI, machine learning, all these things, they are software, they're programs that run on more or less general purpose machinery, depending on how you count a GPU. And are we talking about the security of AI systems just because of the same vulnerabilities that all software has, buffer overflows and so on? Or are we saying there's some new special kinds of vulnerabilities that AI software is going to have that other software didn't?
So if you look at, I think that's a good question. Really, the AI part takes it further back. So once the software is created, so as we think about how would you do this security for AI, many companies and even amongst ourselves, we talk about creating something like an AI red team. So splitting out, kind of AI security from AI red teaming. And some places, Microsoft has an AI red team. Other places are thinking about, so what does this mean? So aside from just the software, once it's to a certain state in the development process, we're in our AI security field, we're thinking, how do we think like an adversary? So there's many, I think there's over 1,500 academic papers on adversarial machine learning in the past 5 years.
Sure.
If you're going to AI red team, which is this confluence of AI people and security people, you need to think about, can an adversary really manipulate the training data? Can they do, kind of poisoning, backdoor attacks? Look at Microsoft Hey, the chatbot. Was that perhaps an intentional poisoning? Who knows? Generally, your adversary can only affect a small amount of training data, but it's thinking about where in the development pipeline these attacks can happen way before the software is coded, if that makes sense.
I see. So if I can corrupt the data, or if I can manage to inject a filter of some sort between the data and the learning system, or on the output and the categorization, whatever it is, then I might be able to swing apparent decisions and so forth. And the the people who are using the system might be none the wiser. And they'll go ahead and do whatever, make stock market trades based on what my corrupted system.
And in fact, that's one of the areas that is affected by this is financial. Now as there's more automated the bots for trading, but people who do spam filtering, this is not necessarily a new field. I mean, this has been done for 15 or 20 years. The AI part is, can an adversary manipulate, as you're testing the classifier, these, kind of linear supervised classifiers, can an adversary affect that? The way they do it now is a little crude, but can somebody get in and affect that and just wipe out and make your spam filtering ineffective?
I mean, one of the things that seems to me different about machine learning and AI and neural nets and all this kind of stuff is it has millions of numbers, millions of parameters. It's largely, it's sort of as linear as it can be, that it just kind of transforms the input into the output, multiplying by 6, adding 9, subtracting, see if it's greater than 10, whatever it is. And it only actually makes decisions, sort of nonlinearities, when it's kind of forced to by the data. Because, oh no, you got that one wrong, so you have to push that down, that sort of thing. Whereas it used to be, when you wrote code by hand, you would write an if statement. If X is greater than 0, you go this way, else you go that way. And you'd have this absolutely crisp snap between two different flows of control. So it would seem that there would be at least potentially a case to be made that the machine learning, neural netty kind of stuff is less hackable because it has sort of less gratuitous nonlinearities. I don't know if this makes any sense at all. Does this sound like anything?
They're actually more hackable because there's more ways. As you're training the software a software that's a classifier, a software that does certain things, there's more ways to fool it now. My opinion is still that the easiest way to do it is, to do a classic DDoS or software attack. But there's more ways because you can fool the classifier. You can fool all sorts of, computer vision is extremely susceptible to this because it relies on all this data. So can you poison the robot vision system? So that the attack surface is much larger. And I think it's further back than what we traditionally think about too.
Certainly this whole thing where you show a picture of an apple and then you put the word iPod in front of it and it classifies it as an iPod. You say, how are you supposed to win there? It becomes very, human semantic about what the correct answer even is. It says it's an iPod. So I see that. I don't know.
I'm hearing more that, like, if you can manipulate the training data, right? So the thing about machine learning is that it's like programming, except instead of writing a lot of commands, you gather a lot of data, you process that data, and then the program kind of comes out of that. And so if you can, to poison code, you have to get to a programmer. You have to convince a programmer to put in a backdoor so that, when this gets deployed, if I ask for a bank loan, I'm going to get paid no matter what, with interest,
or find a bug, Don't have to ask the programmer if you can find a bug and just get in there and redo it yourself.
Oh, if it's like open source kind of scenario?
No. If it's like a buffer overflow and I can get in there and inject
there can
my
be
little bit of code. A bug doesn't require the original programmer of the system to do anything except screw up.
Okay. It doesn't require it. Yes, of course. But what I'm saying is that here, if you can get into somehow manipulate the data, you can have a system that not only gets trained to behave in strange ways, but no one's going to notice it because it's all hidden behind the myriad weights of the neural net itself. It's just really hard to know what's what there. And so I think that's a legitimate concern.
I mean, it feels like so it would be sort of like this kind of steganography stuff where you'd be changing lots of data a little bit, and those would create some sort of underlying vector that would not be obvious, but that would cause a certain category of inaccuracy to the network.
That's how spammers first started. Exploit. That's how spam filters originally started getting fooled. Instead of using the OCR for text, people started putting pictures. And then the arms race started. Oh, okay, well, we're going to use steganography to hide things in the picture so it doesn't look like, I mean, this is exactly it.
Right. It's kind of like CAPTCHAs on the other side.
Exactly.
Wait. Do that analogy. What's
instead of proving that you're a human, you have to prove you're an algorithm because you can't read this. I guess it's the same as a CAPTCHA, kind of just used in a different
in the
purpose.
opposite way.
Like that. Well, that's. I mean, if we could angle a little bit. So I was interested when you said that your background was kind of in network security.
Yeah.
Because this is one of my hobby horses, that it seems to me there's network computer security and there's host computer security. And the outlook for those two areas is radically different. That network security, you can actually do quite a bit. You can detect stuff in flows in real time. You can reroute traffic to try to fight against denial of service attacks like you were mentioning, and so forth. And to me, it seems like the reason you can actually get some traction with network security is because the whole thing is somewhat kind of spatialized. There are flows. There's data that's running through this wire or this channel, and there's other stuff that's running elsewhere. And you can divert this and put that in sinkhole this and do all this kind of stuff. And the people that do, I mean, now commercially do all kinds of DDoS defense, all kinds of network security defense, are doing pretty good. You don't hear about that many giant DDoS attacks on major systems as you did for a while. But then, on the other hand, there's host security. That when now you're just talking about one computer, it may be an important one that has lots of stuff in it, but it's just one computer. And if you can get into it, it's yours.
Right.
And that feels, I mean, to me, that feels extremely hopeless. The prognosis for host computer security. I just don't see it getting better anytime soon. Am I too glum?
I think so. I mean, I don't know that I agree about the network security. I mean, if you look at
network security's having problems too.
I mean, if you look at how many BGP attacks there are, because BGP is a trust system. I mean, that's what I kind of look at as large.
Can you unpack some of that?
So Border Gateway Protocol, how people talk across the internet, that protocol is all based on a trust relationship. Years ago, people had thought about putting in BGP-SEC, a protocol. Right. You know, it's this cat and mouse game, which is a cryptographic signature. That's really hard to implement. So because it's a trust relationship, there's an awful lot of BGP hijacking. And this is how censorship is done, where it's pretty easy to just route packets to nowhere if you don't want people in Egypt to be tweeting about events that have happened. So, but to your point, we've been doing it for longer. I think, actually the opposite, the host security, that's where a lot of the AI people are really focusing, because especially companies that can focus on phishing and malware. And, you know, if I can look at that host and really, you know, think about is a model drifting? How accurate's my model? How, that kind of thing. I think that can be improved.
I was putting AI aside for a minute and just talking about regular old Windows, say, or ransomware, all this stuff that we're reading about in the news over and over and over again. That's what seems hopeless to me.
But I think the hopeless part is because of users. I mean, I think it's not the system. I think it's because, you know, we have easy passwords or we surf to, you know, I think users are always the weakest link.
Can I push back on you there just a little bit
Sure.
on behalf of users? I mean, so my feeling is that the actual guilty party is the computer architecture.
Totally.
The idea of CPU, a single processor that does everything, and random access that you can go anywhere in one step, so that everything has to be absolutely perfect. And if you can knock it off its track once, you can almost surely, you have this huge palette of little fragments of bit patterns all over the place that you can now stitch together into a interpreter for a machine that will do whatever weird business you want. And that fundamentally is because random access memory is way too powerful. And there ought to be architectures that radically restrict that, so that in any given moment, if you fall off the track, if you have a bug, all you can get to is this little bit of stuff. So your odds of being able to stitch together a next step and a next step and a next step go exponentially down.
Except more people are using Chromebooks and not even storing things locally.
Right. Well, so that means like one bigger basket in the cloud.
Right.
Right. And so that's just the pink bathtub ring getting collected and moved somewhere else.
Right.
Like that. And so, I mean, it seems to me that it's easy to blame the users, and users could give a crap, but then they're put into this no-win position where they're essentially unpaid system administrators of their own machines. So it's pretty easy to kind of blame them, for not taking whatever precautions we think that we would do, especially if we were a paid administrator.
Well, it's like we say, don't click on sketchy Wi-Fi, don't click on phishing emails. Well, okay, if you're an average user, what does a phishing email look like? I mean,
they're all kind of fishy these days, like that. And it certainly seems to me like the fishy ones are getting better, that they have fewer typos in them and so forth. And I figure sooner or later I'm going to click on them.
Well, and their MO is to evade the classifiers, right? So they're constantly adjusting. I mean, I don't know how many per hour they're sending, and just constantly making sure that your model drifts enough that you're not able to catch their latest shenanigans.
Wait, so this is bringing these different threads together, right? So there's the user, but then there's the AI that's trying to protect the user, and then there's the people who are figuring out how to thwart the AI to get at the user to get them to actually do something unsafe. And so all these things really do come together.
Yeah.
And I guess, I'm perfectly happy wanting to be a belt and suspenders kind of guy, defense in depth. We got to have lots of different things rather than thinking there's going to be one impenetrable wall. Right. So that may not be a bad thing, that we have these multiple layered business. But it seems like if we relentlessly continue to increase the leverage that computers are controlling, that we're putting behind programmed systems, we're just asking for it. And it's not a matter of who to blame. It's a matter of the system is just, I don't know. It's unstable. It's just, there will be a failure. And so then it's just a question of how much the damage is going to be. And is there some way that we can mitigate that? I mean, I don't know.
And you're advocating for almost a kind of terrorist cell model, right? That just says, if you just keep things isolated enough, things are going to go bad, but that bad thing is not going to instantly spread everywhere.
And it's going to go bad much, much slower, because the leverage in any given cell is going to be as pushed down as we want. Now, that said, eventually a decision has to be made. A coordinated decision has to be made at whatever scale you're trying to make decisions. And if you can get to that last step, that last guy, the one that's actually going to say, go, and corrupt their input, then you're still dead. Which, is kind of like going all the way back to von Neumann talking about making reliable computers out of unreliable components. And he keeps talking about how you can add redundancy and make it better and make it better. But eventually you get to the absolute last output that's just going to leave the system. And if you can just corrupt that step, then it doesn't matter what you did as far as trying to make everything.
You're seeing more like important computing. You're seeing more enclaves and trusted computing and
well, attempts at it anyway.
It. I mean, there's a fair amount of real world of that, but it's in certain sectors because it's still expensive.
Yeah. I mean, there's TPM, right? That's in everything these days. It's the trusted platform monitor or something like that. I'm not exactly
I'm thinking more
sure.
like, Intel SGX and these, kind of TEE architecture.
Right. So the hardware people are deploying new schemes to try to defeat the typical attacks. To say, when a common attack is this idea of running a buffer overflow where you're supposed to have 100 bytes room full of data, but no one actually checks. So if they send 120 bytes of data, it'll go beyond where it's supposed to go. And now that usually relies on actually executing some instructions in a place that instructions weren't supposed to be. And so these new features that Anita is talking about, if I'm getting her, SGX is one of them, right? It's kind of like, determine where executable code can safely be and where it isn't, to kind of tighten things up, right. Like that, which I want to be in support of because it kind of is making random access memory less randomly accessible. So it's kind of trying to squeeze it down and reduce the leverage. And that's all good. But my worry is, and what seems to be the evidence, is that it usually doesn't seem to take that long for people to figure ways around the next generation of hardware, non-execution bit, and so forth. And I don't have any real confidence that game is well-founded. That we're actually going to get to some set of hardware instructions or things that will protect us. And that what we need to do is focus on reducing the leverage of the code on the system level rather than improving the perfection of it at the instruction set.
Well, you look at like Amazon, which does use a lot of trusted computing, enclaves. The biggest vulnerability in Amazon is S3 buckets that are unsecured, like permissions that people set for their S3 storage buckets. That is by far the most biggest vulnerability in Amazon.
So you're saying just a user configuration problem, that S3 buckets, you can set up access control lists or something, that would be okay if you did it, but people don't.
Right.
Like that. And
it's so complex with the rules that are set up. And I mean, Amazon offers for a service some formal reasoning, the formal methods people kind of inspired this, but if you pay, we will tell you exactly what you think your rules are doing. But if not, this sprawl is really, and you can't blame the users.
Welcome. You get the pieces to do whatever you wish.
That's right.
I mean, it does seem to me like there ought to be a market, or if not a market, then an obligation to have some kind of free red teaming of S3 buckets,
Exactly.
But that's a value-added kind of thing that Amazon's making money about, or screw you. That's.
I think I read somewhere that if you're a company setting up your Amazon instance, there's something like 29 different network settings, something crazy like that.
Yeah, I haven't done it in years, but it was horrible back when I did, and I'm sure it's 10 times worse now. And. Well, I don't know. I'm looking for reasons to be optimistic about the future of computer security. And so, I mean, you're saying network security is kind of worse off than I was thinking because BGP, which is one of the basic protocols for deciding where traffic is supposed to go, is easily corrupted, still based on good faith. In a lot of instances,
DNS is becoming much more of a privacy threat, with carriers kind of looking at your DNSs, selling them. Of course, to escalate that, they had DNS over HTTPS, and then the enterprise people are upset because then you can't, reasonably stop things using DNS. So, so one of the projects that I'm working on is the National Science Foundation funded us to build this very large test bed where people, they want to enable people to build the next internet. The internet protocols are terrible. And as a result, computer security over the internet is going to be terrible. Really, we need to rethink the protocols to include privacy, to include security from the get-go. BGP, nobody thought about including security. DNS, who cares? Those two things now they're irreparable. You can't repair them.
Well, but is there a path forward? I mean, is there a way to get to a new protocol?
Because I feel like calls for redesigning the whole internet, have been going on for. Well, I've been aware of them for like 20 years. So this is not a new thing, right?
It's not a new thing, but I mean, the ones that are kind of like have stayed the course, FIA, Future Internet Architecture, and named data networking, these things stick around. But, I'll be frank, I think they just need fresh eyes where people just put all that aside and say, okay, we invested 10 or 15 years into this crap. It doesn't work. Named data networking, it's like if I say, I don't want to use DNS. Named data networking is I want to see cat videos, and the internet miraculously finds me cat videos without having to do DNS resolution. That's great. That's not realistic. There's all these cute proposals from people who've been around for 30, 40 years. None of it's workable. And I think that's the difference also between the original internet and now is it didn't have to be workable at the scale it does now. We need to just completely rethink many of these protocols.
I mean, it's kind of miraculous that it scaled up as much as it
totally
did, right?
Yeah.
So as quote unquote, badly designed as it may be, it's remarkable how many orders of magnitude more traffic is happening now than when this stuff was first put down. So that seems exciting. So I guess what I'm hearing maybe from Dave is it the case that, yeah, you could redesign everything, but it's still going to have this a complementary set of problems. It's not actually going to be any better. Because fundamentally, like what I'm hearing from Dave is fundamentally it's just too attractive to hack, right? There's too much power that you can get by cracking a system, and so the on the supply and demand sort of thing, like the demand is going to be high because the supply is just so rich, and we have to just make it less attractive.
I just keep going back to leverage. How much value are you going to hang on a given decision by an information system? Or even if the information system has some humans incorporated in it, well, it still can be viewed as it's making some kind of decision. And how much leverage are you going to hang on that? Nuclear war, release of bioweapons, money, whatever it is. And the history of computer science, the history of computing, it seems to me, has been based on this idea of determinism and getting it exactly right, and which gives this implication of infinite trustability. That, because the answer it will be perfect. That's what computers do. They guarantee. And that idea that, I can prove that it's correct, or I can demonstrate that it's correct, or I have so many tests, encourages people to then say, okay, well, I will increase the leverage that I am putting behind that particular decision. I will have not just this nuclear bomb, but all the nuclear bombs. I will control not just my little hydroelectric dam on a stream, but all the, Hoover Dam and so on. And what we really need is this small is beautiful deleveraging, where we do not pull this stuff together. We do not centralize it at all, so that you have to attack this one and this one and this one and this one and this one separately. And as you were saying, Michael, you only get a small pot of gold out of each one. And I want to see if there's some way to get there. I don't know.
But it's funny with the internet design, people are going the opposite of this. They want to stop the balkanization and have it more centralize. And it's particularly, I think that the Chinese have proposed new IP, where if you centralize, I think is it new IP, but you centralize, then you can have a big ON/OFF switch. I mean, can you imagine how
yeah, great. Talk about leverage.
I guess it's useful for some things, but clearly not.
Right. So you say Pooh Bear and pop, the internet goes off.
Right.
Like that. Yeah, that to me, I mean, but, is Facebook any different? Is Google any different? Fundamentally, as far as trying to centralize as much as they can to increase their own leverage. They don't want competitors, third parties, organizing Facebook people and then negotiating with Facebook as a group, because that takes away their power. They want it to be individual meet humans and Facebook and nothing in between.
Well, and if you look at Facebook and Google, the amount of submarine cables they've laid, many more than the commercial companies. I mean, in the past 5 years, tons.
Yeah, I just saw that the other day, that Google has laid this thing that does hundreds of terabytes per second of fiber capacity. I mean, this is a corpus callosum. This is a thing for the planetary computer to frickin' wake up on with that much bandwidth going thousands of miles. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how much of that is just going to remain dark for the indefinite future? Who knows? But man, I mean, I don't know. So I went to talk to this guy, Mark Hurst, the other week, who's really concerned about big tech and how we need to rein them all in, and they're not doing society that much good. And I think there's a lot to be said for that idea. But it's like, there's sort of an embarrassment of targets. There's network security, there's host security, there's Facebook, there's China. Is there a way, how can we cut a piece of this off and try to make things better?
Well, in terms of the Facebooks and the Googles, a big part of it last year people talked about a lot was that whole content moderation and who's liable for speech. The regulation around that is a clear low-hanging fruit for the FTC, the FCC, reclassify these folks. Because right now, they are not liable for any content that is on their platform. That is an artifact of the 1990s that I feel absolutely, that is an easy one. Having some teeth when the FTC leverages a fine on Twitter or Facebook. There's no teeth at all to this.
Yeah, that would be great. If we could actually get content liability, or even just a little down payment on it, more than zero. The cost to doing it badly costs more than zero. That would be great. But is it low hanging? It seems like people would fight to the death.
Well, the tech companies will lobby to the death. And on the flip side, they, in terms of content moderation, there has to be a scale. Back, when many of us started in the internet, it was up or it was down. It was very black and white. There's really a range of responses you can do with content moderation. They started to do things like introducing friction where, okay, this isn't going to be posted for another hour or something. I think the content platforms have to be a little more realistic and have to work with us on this. But yeah.
It seems one related problem to that is that there's lots of money available if you will push stuff that isn't really true or helpful, because people with money have trouble getting that kind of message out. So, okay, yeah, we could slow down the rate that you can tweet or something like that because it looks like it's disinformation, but you could pay $1 and speed it back up again. That kind of
Which
thing.
is essentially what ad tech does, right? This is a whole industry of ad tech.
Right. And so is there anything to do with that? Is there any way to make that more transparent or something? I don't know. Or is it just...
One thing I thought about for incidents, for content, for these kind of things is we don't have an independent body like at NTSB. Like if there's a plane crash or some question, the NTSB is completely neutral. When there's a computer security incident, a content incident, election interference, one thing the U.S. needs, we have the FTC, but you have to prove that a consumer was harmed. And that's very hard to prove. You have the FCC. Yeah, this doesn't really fall under that. We need a neutral body that looks at these things to say who's to blame. Is there harm to somebody or something? I don't know what that would look like, but...
the consumer protection?
Totally, something like that. Yeah, exactly.
CPB,
yeah.
CPB, yeah. Like that. In the limit, it's... you say, okay, well, I voted for the other guy, so I'm not supporting the winner. And that's supposed to be fine. That's supposed to be cherished. But then at some point, there's this gray area, and then there's this, no, now you're definitely lying and saying that, Russia, blah, 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 whatever it was, something like that. And people want to make slippery slope arguments that unless you allow all free speech that money can buy, now you're destroying what made America great. And I don't believe that, but I'm not exactly sure how to draw the line.
For me, it often comes down to who gets to talk to who, right? So I feel like if people are making posts and they're my friends, we have our own kind of social network, right? That says don't use that kind of language, or don't make these kinds of assumptions. And it's sort of enforceable in that we're friends, and so like I can frown at them, and that has meaning.
Right.
At some point, I don't know, some of these social media groups decided, oh no, and everybody should be able to talk to everybody, or it's much wider, where there's no longer any kind of pushback, any kind of accountability. And so they've become publishers, but they deny being publishers because they're like, oh, it's just people talking to people. But they're the ones putting it out there. They're the ones putting it in my face. And I feel like they have crossed that line, and they need to, it needs to be reconsidered how are they allowed to just do that? Are they allowed to send everything to everybody? Right? Because we had rules in the U.S. about what kind of messages were going to be okay to put over the airwaves. And I feel like we've,
right.
and I feel like we're kind of
fairness
back
doctrine.
Yeah.
That we ditched.
I see. We ditched that even for TV. So why should we reinstitute it for? Yeah, well, that's fair.
Well, no. I don't think it was right to ditch it. I think it was a terrible mistake. But it's a ship that sailed a long time ago. We'd have to build a new ship to get some of that back.
So back to Anita a little bit. So there are other. You said you got this new NSF grant. That's very exciting. Are there other kinds of projects that you've been involved in that would be fun to talk about?
So our new NSF project, I don't know if I mentioned, so we have the test bed, but the new one is we're building a disinformation game for senior citizens and for middle schoolers. We just got that this week.
All right. I saw that. The D-range.
Yes, D-range. Yeah. So,
D-range.
So I mean, I think the key is going to be engaging. Many of these games are really cheesy and people think they know what disinformation is. But I mean, many of us feel the biggest target population for disinformation are senior citizens, just for various reasons. And so being able to educate them is exciting in middle schoolers. So that's pretty exciting. We're also, NIST is, it's maybe not exciting, but NIST is thinking an awful lot about what an AI risk management framework is. So a bunch of us, again.
NIST is the Institute for Standards and Technology.
Right.
And so they're thinking about which aspect of this?
So love them or hate them, they come up with the guidelines for all sorts of things. Among them, they have this 800 series, which is the guidelines for computer network system security. And people do follow them. If you're in certain businesses, you have to follow some version of that. They are starting to think about a couple things. One, they actually have a taxonomy of adversarial machine learning, which was awful, but they're starting to think about it. They're also thinking about how to build a risk management framework for AI systems. The implication being, how do you identify risk in an AI system? Who does it? Who cares? So they had an open call, again, from the Hacker Village, we submitted to that. So we're thinking a lot about that. We're also thinking, we worked on this project that Microsoft and IBM and others kind of really took off with, which is could you adapt, again, imperfect, but if you took the MITRE, the MITRE attack model, and MITRE has this big schema of techniques, tactics, and procedures for attacks on your system. It's not great, but many of the systems that are used for security are based in kind of classifying, here's a technique, here's a tactic, here's how the person does it. So we're thinking that's great, after 20 years of computer systems attacks, but how do you classify AI attacks? How do you know what the tactics are, the techniques? How do you look for it? So, a lot of us have been kicking around, where do we go with this? So that's kind of a work in progress. It's not fun, but it's interesting to think about.
So this D-range thing, so that's a game to teach people about disinformation and how it spreads and how to recognize it and all that. Is it two games, one for middle schoolers and one for senior citizens, or does one do both?
I think they're pitted against each other to see who wins for our future.
It's funny. I just sent the creator. So the main person who's doing it, we actually met at DEFCON because he made us, Siwei Liu at Buffalo, he made us a deep fake. We deep faked the Democratic National Committee chair with his permission. This is before the election. So he made an awesome, realistic deep fake. So the platform will be the same. The content will be different. I mean, I just saw something the other day where there's more like TikTok influencers who are teenagers saying to other teenagers, hey, here's how you could tell it's misinformation. The ears don't line up and the eyebrows don't look that good, which is really interesting to see that they are picking up on this. So the content will be different. Considering seniors use Facebook a lot, use email, whereas the younger generation doesn't use email. They use different platforms. So I think our key is going to be make it engaging. So we're talking to people who have been involved with EA games, and they made these like really best-selling games. We've said, how do you incentivize people? Why do people like to play them? To make it more like an actual game, not a cheesy like sit in front of your computer type thing. The range part is if you've ever used a security, like a capture the flag competition, there's a lot of these security ranges where we're trying to emulate that a little bit.
So this would be like an actual game that you might play on Steam or download for Xbox or whatever
Correct.
it is, rather than something you would just find organically on Facebook and something like that. So you would know that you were at a game.
Correct.
But you would go there because your senior citizen friend told you it was fun or whatever it is, like that. Well, I mean, it sounds like it's fighting the good fight, and to get that awareness back up. I mean, I guess it's circling all the way back to the beginning of the conversation that if you can't fix the users, then who cares whether the hardware is secure or not?
And the people who study disinformation, and there's people, our partners from Clemson are very good at this. They actually spotted a lot of the Russian troll content. They've done multiple studies, and it doesn't matter your education, your age level, your multiple demographics. Everybody is, we don't want to think it, everybody is susceptible to dis and misinformation. All of us.
I mean, it seems like it's just, we want to believe what we want to believe. So if we have any desire, if we have any judgment over a better world or a worse world than someone who tells us here's a better world, we're going to be inclined to believe them. And at some level, that's part of the nature of being intelligent or being able to have an intention, to have a dream, that kind of thing. So we can't just dismiss that out of hand as being absolutely bad.
But there's techniques, right? So I want to say that the field, I don't know if Anita, I don't know if this is the way that you guys have framed it or not, but I've heard it described as media literacy, right? There's this sort of notion that you're a consumer of all this information and you need to be a little savvy about it. You can't just let it all just, go directly into your brainstem. You have to question it sometimes. And there's techniques that the people in media literacy try to share. They try not to take a stance on what's propaganda and what's not, because they don't want to be the referee, but they want to say, okay, here are things that you can do that will give you a clearer idea of the kind of information that you're getting. And you can decide, like, if this is something you want to buy into, that's up to you.
Other countries do this very well. Estonia is a leader in this. They're a completely digital society. The EU, they have a whole NATO task force that stood up before elections that specifically thinks about media literacy to make people just a little more cynical. Not that you shouldn't trust any media, but to really kind of think twice, as you're saying.
Or savvy, yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. I mean, here's a quick...
Go ahead.
Just a quick story that I probably shouldn't tell, and we're late on time, but
so definitely tell.
Yeah. But Anita, just because what Anita said made me feel a little bit better, which is like we're all susceptible, even the best of us. And I know I'm not the best of us, but I thought I was better than this. So my daughter found online. She just got out of college and she's looking for jobs. So she found a job ad online and she started the process of applying for this ad. And there were things about it that were a little sketchy. And so she would occasionally check with me as, the neighborhood, in-family computer science PhD. Like, this seems maybe not completely up on the up and up. And so I would look into it and I'd be like, yeah, it smells funny, but I can't really find anything wrong with it. And so she just kept going through the process until ultimately she sent them her passport and her social security number and various things with my okay. She insists that I point that out, only to discover immediately after, oh, this was a scam. They said they were part of this company, but she finally got through to the company and the company's like, we have nothing to do with that. And some of it felt very sophisticated. It was like a really good job ad for what she wants to do. And but the interviews were all by email. Like there was no human contact. It was all very weird and
anemic. The interactions were anemic.
And it felt wrong, but I couldn't find the flaw, and I gave it a green light. And so and Anita says it's okay. It doesn't make me a bad person.
There was a project, just my last quip, there was a project years ago, I don't think it got funded by the National Science Foundation, but it was a project to harness what we think of as our spidey sense. You see a website, something like doesn't feel right, you're not sure what. And that's an example. They didn't get funded, but it's like, how do you quantify that? It's hard. We just know, like, instinctively, it's like you're walking in a bad neighborhood. Something's not right.
Well, I mean, that seems like it's hard to take advantage of. But it would be good if there was a, spider feeling button you could push, and just, see how many other people were feeling creeped out about it. Like these, down detector websites where people are saying,
right.
Is USPS tracking down? Yes, it is. Like that.
Okay, just wanted to be sure.
People complained. Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, so I guess I'm not completely convinced there's reason for optimism here. I want to be convinced, but I guess, there's fighting the good fight, and we need to full court press. We need to help the users get better. We need to, I think, what you were talking about, Michael, with the media savvy that I associate with like, Carl Bergstrom and the call and BS, type class, which he's doing at the college level. But that seems to me that should be fourth grade, and that, we could stand up people that, on the other hand, there's this argument that the kids these days that grew up on the internet, that grew up on TikTok, they're already vastly more sophisticated about this kind of stuff than we are. Now, whether that's just anecdotal or whether that's really well-founded, I don't know. It seems kind of well-founded. And so maybe it's the old folks are complete, clueless because they're too old. They were born. That the people that are going to be old folks 40 years from now will not be so bad. Of course, 40 years from now, there'll be biological robots to scam them and, whatever. But, that's their problem. So I guess the takeaway is we've got to be smart, and we've got to try to make these systems more resilient, and more sort of inherently robust. And those are good ends.
It's think about how the system can be abused. It's no different than you talking about computer systems. How can AI be abused? Really think about the abusability before they're deployed.
Well, that seems like good advice. We should do that for systems, including AI systems, for sure. Well, Anita, it was great to meet you. I appreciate the stuff that you're doing and hope for the best. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anita.
This was Computing Up. Thanks for listening.